The prison where I was, Matroska Tishina, on the one hand, it's the worst prison you can be in terms of having any chance of freedom, because it's the one that's directly controlled by the Kremlin and the FSB. So literally nobody gets out of there without a conviction.
You might remember this programme followed the case of our colleague, the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. He spent 491 days in a Russian jail on trumped-up espionage charges. Remember, we read out his name every single day of those 491 days. We also often speak to Bill Browder, who always reminds us of his friend, the Russian tax lawyer Sergei Magnitsky. Sergei died in a Russian jail after crossing Vladimir Putin. And of course, none of us forget Alexei Navalny, the opposition leader who died mysteriously in a Siberian jail. So what is it like being one of Putin's prisoners? Michael Calvey came to Russia from Wall Street as the USSR collapsed, looking for investment and development opportunities, but his activities landed him in prison after being arrested in 2019 for embezzlement. We can speak to him now, I'm delighted to say. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
What happened to you? How did you find yourself in a Russian prison?
Well, I was the biggest foreign investor in Russia and was known as the investor who helped to create a lot of Russia's technology giants like Yandex or Tinkoff and others. And the last thing I imagined is that I would get arrested for some sort of spurious charge or case. But I ended up in a dispute with two nefarious characters who were able to persuade the FSB to start a fabricated case against me. And I found myself in jail. In fact, the same jail where Sergei Magnitsky was and where he died, Matroska Tishina.
So you believed at the point that you got to Russia that there's this whole sort of end of history view that once the Berlin Wall fell and the USSR fell, there was an idea that Russia would be welcomed in, there would be sort of a peaceful collaboration between European and American and Russia all together. Were you an optimist at one point?
I was an optimist for a long time. And certainly if you had lived there and seen it through my own eyes, it would be hard not to be optimistic, seeing the dire state of the country when I first arrived, and then what seemed like genuine progress. People living much better lives than their parents or grandparents were. But what I didn't really appreciate until my arrest and I came up against the system directly is just how deep the penetration of the Russian security services is in their control over all aspects of Russian society.
And how much is that on Putin, do you feel? Because there's a lot of talk, if Putin were to fall, maybe the person who replaces him would be even worse than Putin. But certainly Putin feels, does he represent, in your view, the corruption of the state?
He represents the elite of Russia, which includes the security services, but also economic and business elites, some kind of loyal cultural figures. But there's no doubt that the ruling caste in Russia are the FSB and the security services. And I don't think that would change if and when Putin leaves office.
Tell us about Russian prison. It sounds like, at least in the abstract, you would think it would be a terrible place. How bad was it?
Well, it is miserable. The prison where I was, Matroska Tishina, on the one hand, it's the worst prison you can be in terms of having any chance of freedom, because it's the one that's directly controlled by the Kremlin and the FSB. So literally nobody gets out of there without a conviction. But I guess the positive side is they don't put normal murderers or violent criminals there. It's mostly people who are there being charged with economic crimes or political detainees. So I ended up sharing a cell with 6 men, having expected the worst, having expected being put in a cell with, hardened Chechen warlords or something like that. I ended up with 6 really decent guys facing much worse circumstances than me. But we kind of supported each other. At the end, it was inspirational. And that's part of what I write about in my book. I dedicate the book to my 6 cellmates.
What do you make of Donald Trump saying, a lot of the discussion about peace in Ukraine seems to rest on Donald Trump's assertion that America and Russia can do business again, should do business again. You're a former optimist. Your book's called Odyssey Moscow, but you're a former optimist. What do you make of Trump? Is Trump being realistic, or is he being willfully delusional, do you think?
It's hard to say without knowing what's actually going on inside his head and what's happening in the conversations. But I don't believe it's possible for the U.S. and Russia to become allies or genuine friends as long as the ruling caste of Russia remains the FSB and the security services. But I do believe that it's possible to, well, first of all, it's long overdue to start negotiations to try to end the war. So We can all criticize how the Trump administration is doing this, but what they're trying to do, I think, is urgent for those people who support Ukrainian independence. Time is not on their side. Obviously, the devil is in the details, and the question is, how do you end the war between Russia and Ukraine permanently so that Ukraine can remain an independent country? But I definitely support and encourage negotiations to try to bring about an end to the war as soon as possible.
We've had a hell of a perspective on the Russian state, Michael. It's really interesting to speak to you. Thank you for joining us now.
Thank you.
That's Michael Calvey. His book is called Odyssey Moscow, One American's Journey from Russian Optimist to Prisoner of the State.
No, I want to see him make a deal so that we stop Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers and other people from being killed. But mostly it's Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. They're losing at least 2,500 human beings, beautiful human beings, a week. And I wanted to stop. And some people would say, why do you worry about Russian soldiers or Ukrainian soldiers? I worry because it's like they're just like you people. They're like us. They're like all of us. And I seem to have an ability to do those things. And if I can do that, I think it's a very worthwhile thing to do. And I think we will. No, I want to make sure that he follows through, and I think he will. I don't want to go secondary tariffs on his oil, but I think, it's something I would do if I thought he wasn't doing the job. I think he's going to live up to what he told me, and I think he's going to fulfill his part of the deal. Now, then you have Zelensky, and hopefully he's going to live up. I see he's trying to renegotiate the rare earth. We did something because, as you know, the Europeans get paid back the money that they gave, and we don't, because Biden is an incompetent president. And he should have asked for rare earth, or he should have asked for the loans to be guaranteed in some form. That's what Europe did. What happens is we made a deal for rare earth. It was all done. And I heard through you, I haven't spoken to them yet, but through you, I heard that they're now saying, well, I'll only do that deal if we get into NATO or something to that effect. Well, that was never, number one, discussed. Number two, I think it's going to be long before Putin, they said you're not going into NATO. And it could be, that's probably the reason the war started, actually.
Yeah, 4 hours away.
The Kremlin said on Monday Vladimir Putin remained open to contacts with US President Donald Trump, after Trump said on Sunday he was pissed off with the Russian president. Trump threatened to impose secondary tariffs of 25 to 50% on buyers of Russian oil if he felt Moscow was blocking his efforts to end the war in Ukraine. He told NBC News he was angry after Putin last week criticised the credibility of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's leadership. Trump has adopted a more conciliatory stance towards Russia that has worried Western allies, as he tries to end what he calls a ridiculous war, which began when Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. He himself has called for new elections in Ukraine and denounced Zelensky as a dictator. Trump criticised him again on Sunday over a critical minerals deal that US officials have been pushing Kyiv to accept. A summary of the draft suggests the US is demanding all Ukraine's natural resources income for years. Zelensky has said Kyiv's lawyers need to review it.
And I think Zelensky, by the way, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal. And if he does that, he's got some problems, big problems. We made a deal with rare earth. And now he's saying, well, I want to renegotiate the deal. He wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that.
Asked about Trump's anger with Putin, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Moscow continued to work with Washington, and a call between Trump and Putin could be set up at short notice if necessary. Trump had later repeated that he was disappointed with Putin, but added, "I think we are making progress step by step." He said he could impose new trade measures on Russia within a month. Russia has called numerous Western sanctions and restrictions illegal and designed for the West to seize economic advantage in its rivalry with Russia.